Peter Drucker, Management Pioneer. Neil Milliken, SLIS 704, Summer 2017. Within the field of management, Peter Drucker has many nicknames. He is known as the father of modern management, the man who invented management, and the most enduring management thinker of our time. His basic ideas about management were based on the concepts of innovation and entrepreneurship. Drucker is famous for conveying his ideas in plain language that could be understood by all managers, regardless of their educational background. Drucker was born in Vienna, Austria in 1909. His parents regularly held evening salons in the family's home that included as guests economists, politicians, musicians, writers, and scientists. These conversations over the dinner table greatly impacted Drucker's later life. In the 1920s, Drucker moved from Austria to Germany, where he studied law. He also became an editor at a local newspaper in Germany. In the 1930s, Drucker received his PhD in international law. However, some of his writings for newspapers were being noticed in a negative way by the Nazi Party, and he was forced to move to England. He later immigrated to the United States in 1937. Drucker noted that Nazi Germany greatly impacted his work. He was particularly concerned with why the Nazi Party rose to power after World War I and the Great Depression. As Drucker saw it, quote, "These catastrophes suddenly exposed the vacuum behind the facade of society." He believed that these two events, World War I and the Great Depression, led European society to embrace, quote, "the abracadabra of fascism." When Drucker moved to the United States, he taught politics and philosophy at a university in Vermont for 20 years. He later taught management at New York University's Business School, and starting in the 1970s, he taught at Claremont's Graduate School of Management in California. Drucker's work in management came about largely because of his interest in post-war America, particularly U.S. corporations, which he saw as a way to combat the future rise of fascism in the world. He believed much of this hinged on well-disciplined management. Starting in the 1940s, Drucker was an early pioneer in arguing that management was in fact a distinct field that ought to be studied. And he was also a pioneer in developing the idea of results-based management and calling for the important need for strategic plans by which managers could gauge their success. During the 1940s, Drucker was invited to study the General Motors Corporation. His research into this company led to the publication of one of his books, The Concept of the Corporation. Later, he also did consulting work for Sears Roebuck, IBM, and a few decades after that for Intel. Drucker was one of the early management pioneers to understand that modern workers were moving from physical occupations to a knowledge-based occupation environment. Drucker studied both American and Japanese workers during his research. He later branched out to doing consulting work for government and nonprofit agencies, most famously with the Girl Scouts of America. He firmly believed that his management theories could be equally applicable to businesses, governments, and nonprofits, and he believed that all organizations should create a work culture that helped guide employees in their tasks. Drucker was a proponent of management by executives. This relies on performance-based reward systems and performance-based budget systems. Drucker was also a strong proponent for frequent constructive feedback, both from management and from workers back to management. Drucker did have his critics. Some argued that he was trained as a journalist first and only a scholar second. Others said he never did gather the quantitative evidence he needed to support his arguments, and that many of his arguments were only proven decades later by other social scientists. However, Drucker himself always categorized his research and writing style as, quote, management as a liberal art. I will end this presentation with a quote that Drucker wrote in the Harvard Business Review. Cultivate a deep understanding of yourself, not only what your strengths and weaknesses are, but also how you learn, how you work with others, what your values are, and where you can make the greatest contribution. Because only when you operate from strengths can you achieve true excellence.